It was a Tuesday, one of those washed-out LA afternoons when the sky wore a dull gray shawl and the wind moved like it had secrets. Elon Musk had come to the Palisade Hotel not for business, not for interviews or boardrooms, but simply to disappear for a few hours in the anonymity of room service and soft jazz. He'd booked the penthouse not because he needed the space, but because it was the only way to avoid the cameras and the unsolicited handshakes. Fame had a way of distorting time, days bleeding into each other, meals turning cold during meetings, human faces becoming abstract, background noise. He hadn't expected anything to pull him out of that drift today. But fate, apparently, had a different script. It happened in the hotel lobby, just as he was stepping out of the elevator. A man, maybe mid-40s, dressed like he'd run out of choices rather than picked an outfit, stood waiting near the large window that overlooked the coast. His clothes were wrinkled, eyes heavy, hair disheveled like it had been arguing with sleep for days. As soon as Elon stepped into the marble hallway, their eyes met, not with recognition, not with awe, but with something quieter. A weight, a knowing. And before Elon could register it, the man stepped forward, said nothing, and pressed a torn, faded photograph into his hand. It was strange. The man didn't ask for a selfie or even say Elon's name. He just gave him that photograph, creased at the edges, the image inside nearly faded into shadows, and walked past him like a ghost dissolving into daylight. Elon stood still, his hand gripped around the photo, heart skipping a beat without explanation. For a long moment, he didn't look at it. Something about the man's eyes had lodged in his chest like a small stone in still water. There was grief there, old grief, patient grief, the kind that sits in silence at the edge of your bed and watches you sleep. Finally, he looked down at the photo. The edges were frayed like it had been torn from something larger. The colors were sun-bleached, barely holding on to form. But there, right in the center, was a child. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, standing next to an old model rocket, smiling wide with a gap in his teeth. Elon's breath caught in his throat. The boy in the photo wasn't him, but he looked like he could have been. Same shape of the eyes, same expression of wonder. And next to the boy, with one arm slung protectively around his shoulder, was a man with an unmistakable look of fatherhood in his posture. Elon turned the photo over. There was handwriting on the back, slanted, rushed, and smudged. Just 3 words, "He still believes." He blinked. Once, twice, then looked back toward the window. The man was gone. He walked out into the lobby, scanning faces, but there was no sign of him. Just hotel guests murmuring over drinks, bellboys pushing luggage carts, a pianist filling the air with something bittersweet in a minor. Clutching the photo, Elon moved toward the front desk. "Did man just walk out of here?" he asked the concierge. Mid-40s, blue flannel shirt, looked kind of tired. The concierge frowned slightly, shaking his head. "I didn't see anyone fitting that description, Mr. Musk. But I can check the cameras if you'd like." "No," Elon's voice was low, distracted. "No, that's okay." He slipped the photo into his coat pocket like it was a matchstick he didn't dare light, and turned toward the doors, thoughts spiraling like satellites caught in gravity. Something about that moment, its silence, its intimacy, had carved a groove inside him that felt as old as memory. He could have dismissed it, called a publicity stunt or a prank, or just another strange encounter in a life full of them. But something about the way the man looked at him, like they shared a loss neither had named, kept echoing in his chest. By the time Elon stepped outside, the sky had turned from gray to almost gold, the sun struggling to break through. He didn't know where he was going, only that he couldn't return to the penthouse just yet. His feet carried him down Ocean Avenue, toward the long, winding pier that jutted out into the sea. Wind tugged at his coat. The sounds of gulls, distant traffic, and the occasional skateboard followed him like static. He found a bench near the end of the pier and sat, pulling the photo out again. It still felt warm in his hand, as though it carried something alive. He stared at it, trying to place the boy's face, the man's expression, the meaning of those 3 words. He still believes. Who did they mean? And why give this to him? 100 possibilities floated through his mind. Maybe it was a message meant for someone else. Maybe the man mistook him for somebody he used to know. Or maybe, just maybe, there was a connection here that went deeper than logic. That night, Elon Musk didn't go back to his room. He sat under the dim yellow pier lights until they clicked off, until the morning joggers arrived and the ocean began its quiet applause once again. He watched the sky lighten, one line of pink at a time, holding onto the photograph like a thread connected to something he hadn't yet remembered. Somewhere in that fading night, a memory stirred. One he thought he'd buried under years of distraction and noise. A promise he had made to someone when he was still a boy, before the rockets, before the companies, before the headlines. A simple promise to never forget where he came from. But he had. Somewhere along the way, he had. By the time Elon returned to his hotel room, the world had already resumed its ordinary rhythm. Notifications were stacked like bricks on his phone, blinking with urgency, meeting reminders, article drafts waiting for approval, investor pings from time zones far from his own. But all of it felt like static now, like background noise to a melody he couldn't quite hum yet, but knew in his bones. He placed the photograph gently on the glass table beside the sofa, almost reverently, like it might dissolve if handled too roughly. Then he sank into the armchair, staring at it like it might speak. He couldn't shake the feeling that the boy in the photo wasn't just a resemblance, it was deliberate. But why? And what did it mean that someone had risked walking up to one of the most recognizable people on Earth just to deliver it, without a single word? He reached for the hotel landline. "Hey, this is Mr. Musk. Can I get someone to bring me a light dinner? Nothing fancy, just something warm." There was a pause on the other end, surprise likely muffled behind trained politeness. "Of course, Mr. Musk. Right away." After hanging up, he stood and walked to the large window that overlooked the coast. The sky was now completely dark, and the pier he'd sat on hours ago sparkled with distant lamps. He watched the tide come in, then recede again. People always said the ocean helped you think. He didn't feel like thinking. He just wanted to feel something real. And oddly enough, this crumpled photo had done that. 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a hotel staff member, a young woman with sharp eyes and a soft voice. She pushed the dinner cart in and smiled, not out of obligation, but gently, like someone who sensed his heaviness and didn't want to intrude. "Elon Musk, right?" she asked carefully, placing the food near the table. "Sorry, that was dumb. Of course you are." He smiled faintly. "No worries." She glanced at the photo on the table, then at him. "That yours?" He hesitated. "Not really. Someone gave it to me. A stranger." She tilted her head, curiosity blooming. "That's kind of beautiful, actually. What's the story behind it?" "I don't know yet," Elon said. And he meant it. "But I think I'm supposed to find out." The woman lingered for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Hope you do. Feels like something important." And with that, she left. A simple moment. A simple sentence. But it landed with more weight than he expected. He sat down again, eyes on the photo, untouched food in front of him. He picked up the image for the 100th time and stared at the boy's smile. The handwriting haunted him. He still believes. Believe in what? Dreams? People? Him? Sleep came late that night, and when it did, it brought with it a dream that didn't feel like a dream at all. He was walking through a sunlit field, barefoot, the sky an impossible blue. He saw a boy ahead, same one from the photo. The boy turned to him, smiled, and said, "You stopped building things for us, but we're still waiting." And when Elon woke up, his cheeks were damp. Hey, if you've made it this far, I want to pause for just a second. You're obviously someone who appreciates stories that hit a little deeper, right? The kind that don't just pass the time, but make you feel something. So if that's you, and if you're even a little curious about where this journey with Elon and the photograph is headed, maybe hit that subscribe button. Not because it's what people say to do, but because I'd love to have you here for the next moment that makes us both stop and feel. Okay, let's get back to the story. The following morning arrived gently, as if it too were unsure of what had begun the day before. Elon didn't spring out of bed, nor did he reach for his phone. He sat up slowly, the faint outline of the ocean etched against the horizon outside his window, and stared blankly at the photo still resting on the side table, like a relic that refused to vanish in the light of day. But something had changed. There was a pull now, subtle, quiet, but undeniable. After a quick shower and black coffee that tasted more like obligation than comfort, Elon dressed simply in jeans and a navy sweater, leaving behind the tailored layers of the man the world expected him to be. He tucked the photograph into the inside pocket of his jacket like a secret, took the elevator down in silence, and stepped into the open air with a directionless certainty in his stride. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to go. The streets were already busy, the city humming with its usual cocktail of ambition and distraction. He walked without pace, drifting through alleys and overpasses, letting the world guide him rather than the other way around. A coffee shop, a street musician playing a cello in the shade of a mural, a bookstore with cracked windows and ivy spilling down the brick walls. He noticed things. He felt things. He was somewhere near Melrose when he paused, catching a glimpse of something that didn't quite register at first. There was a small vintage photo shop nestled between two boarded-up storefronts, its hand-painted sign barely legible. Echo frame photographs from forgotten lives. He stood there for a moment, wondering why he'd never noticed it before. Then again, how often did he walk like this? How often did he let his feet wander instead of his calendar? Inside, the store smelled of cedar and old film. Dozens of framed photographs lined the walls, black and white memories frozen mid-laugh, mid-cry, mid-life. There were boxes labeled by decade, some filled with curled-up prints from the 1930s, others from the 70s, 80s, moments people had given away or forgotten. Behind the counter stood a man with wild white hair and round glasses, thumbing through a stack of Polaroids like a priest handling sacred scripture. Elon approached cautiously. "Morning," he said. The man looked up, squinting for just a second before offering a warm, uneven smile. "Morning. Looking for anything in particular, or just passing through?" Elon hesitated, then pulled the torn photograph from his jacket. "Actually, this found me yesterday. I don't know where it came from, but I was wondering if you've ever seen anything like it. Or maybe the style, the way it's printed?" The man took it gently, handling it like a museum piece. He turned it over, squinted at the faded writing, then hummed quietly. "Interesting. This isn't a standard print. It's real silver gelatin. Hand-processed, probably in a small batch. Could be anywhere from the late 80s to early 2000s. See these corners? That little tear? It looks like it was part of a larger photo, maybe an old collage or family album that got separated." He paused and looked up, curiosity in his eyes now. "Who gave this to you?" "I don't know," Elon said truthfully. "Just a man in a hotel lobby. Said nothing. Just handed it to me and vanished." The man studied Elon's face for a second longer than was comfortable, then slowly slid the photo back across the counter. "You know," he said, voice dropping, "this sort of thing happens more than you'd think. Not to most people, sure, but the ones who are tuned in, the ones carrying something unresolved. Photos like this, they're like little echoes. They find the right ears eventually." Elon looked down at the photo again. An echo of what? Something unfinished. The words stayed with him even after he left the shop. He continued walking, looping through neighborhoods where Spanish moss clung to fences and kids chalked suns on cracked sidewalks. His phone buzzed every few minutes, but he ignored it. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like solving a problem. He felt like listening to one. And then, unexpectedly, he saw a mural on the side of an old school building that brought him to a full stop. It showed a boy launching a handmade rocket into the sky, his expression filled with triumph and awe. The artist had painted the clouds to swirl upward in the shape of a human heart. Beneath the boy's feet were scattered pages of blueprints, gears, and scribbled calculations. Elon felt something twist in his chest. It was almost the same boy from the photo. Not identical, but close enough to ignite something. There was a plaque under the mural, small and brushed bronze, barely noticeable. It read, "Dedicated to Mason Riley, for those who keep dreaming even when no one is watching." Elon stood there for a long time. Then, like a thread had finally been tugged loose, he whispered aloud, "Mason." The name clung to Elon's thoughts like a puzzle piece still warm from someone else's hands. Mason Riley. It sounded familiar, but not in a headline kind of way. More like something from the edges of memory, or a line in a book he once read and never quite forgot. The mural had clearly been there a while, the colors softened by time, the plaque slightly tarnished, yet he couldn't stop staring at it, as if the boy himself might step out of the painting and speak. The wind picked up, brushing across Elon's face, and he suddenly felt exposed, like someone had opened a drawer inside him he'd long since locked away. He pulled out his phone, not to check emails or markets, but to search. Mason Riley Mural Los Angeles. The first few links were irrelevant, but then one caught his eye, a local blog post from nearly a decade ago. The headline read, "South LA School Unveils Mural in Honor of Student Lost Too Soon." His breath caught as he clicked. The article was short, with 2 grainy photos and a caption. It explained that the mural had been painted in honor of a 12-year-old boy who had passed away in a fire at a community center. The piece was a collaboration between students, local artists, and teachers who had taught Mason, a young science enthusiast who had dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer. The caption beneath the final photo made Elon freeze. He still believed, even when no one else did. The same phrase, the very same words that were scribbled on the back of the torn photo, now tucked back in Elon's pocket. Suddenly, the fog in his mind lifted slightly. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was intentional. He stood in front of the mural for a long time before pulling the photograph back out, holding it up to compare. The smile, the stance, the model rocket, it all aligned. The boy in the mural was the boy in the photo. But that left bigger questions unanswered. Who was the man standing next to him in the image? And why deliver it to him? He needed to know more. 10 minutes later, Elon stood outside the chain-link gates of Riley Elementary School. The building itself had aged, its paint faded, the garden overgrown, but breathed with the quiet dignity of a place that had held thousands of childhoods within its walls. A security guard near the entrance gave him a skeptical look, but said nothing when Elon nodded politely and walked through the front doors. Inside, the main hallway smelled like pencil shavings and old paper. Student artwork lined the walls, bright bursts of color framed by construction paper. He approached the front desk, where an older woman with a kind but no-nonsense demeanor looked up from her paperwork. "Good morning," she said. "How can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone who might have known Mason Riley," Elon said gently. "He was a student here, years ago." The woman's face softened, her eyes narrowing slightly in recognition. "You knew Mason?" "I didn't," Elon admitted. "But I think someone wants me too." She stared at him for a long beat, then slowly rose from her chair. "Follow me." They walked down a quiet hall to a small office where sunlight streamed through blinds onto a desk filled with framed photos, sticky notes, and a half-drunk cup of tea. The woman gestured for him to sit, then settled across from him. "I was his counselor," she said. "Name's Irene. Mason was something special. You don't forget a kid like that." Elon leaned forward. "Can I ask you about him?" She nodded, her voice quiet and steady. Mason was brilliant. Not just smart, he was curious. He'd build rockets out of paper towel tubes and make presentations about Mars to anyone who would listen. But his home life, it wasn't easy. His dad left when he was a baby. His mom struggled with illness. Most days, Mason came to school early just to feel safe, stayed late to use the science lab, and he always believed he was going to change the world, no matter how hard it got. Elon swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Irene continued, "When the fire happened, we lost more than a student. We lost a dreamer. After that, some of his friends and I pushed for the mural. We didn't want people to forget." He hesitated before speaking again. "Do you know who the man in this photo might be?" he asked, carefully pulling it from his jacket and laying it on her desk. Irene looked at it with wide eyes, stunned. That's his science mentor, Mr. Alvarez. He volunteered here during weekends. Used to be an engineer. Took a liking to Mason, saw something in him. After Mason died, he sort of disappeared. Quit everything. No one really knew where he went. Do you have any idea where I could find him? She nodded slowly. Last I heard, he ran a repair shop out near Topanga Canyon. He didn't want to be found. Said the world got too loud. Elon stood up, his pulse racing in a way he hadn't felt in years. Not from fear, not from ambition, but from something far more human. The kind of purpose that doesn't need headlines. Before he left, Irene placed a gentle hand on his arm. I don't know why this came to you, she said softly, but I believe things find the people they're meant to. And if that photo found you, maybe you're supposed to carry something forward. The road to Topanga Canyon stretched long and winding, as if it were pulling Elon through layers of time rather than geography. Each curve took him further from the noise of the city and deeper into something older, quieter. The sky above had settled into a pale blue haze, and eucalyptus trees lined the hillsides like sentinels keeping ancient watch. The smell of earth, of dry wood and coastal air, filled the Tesla's cabin as he rolled the windows down, letting the wind speak. He wasn't used to this. Driving without a destination defined by data, without a podcast filling every moment. Just silence, the hum of the tires, and the photo on the passenger seat like a compass needle turning towards something unknown. Topanga was more than a place, it was a feeling. The buildings were rustic and stubbornly analog, almost immune to time. Handmade signs hung over coffee shops, wind chimes danced in the breeze, and people walked like they weren't in a rush to escape anything. Elon parked outside a small auto repair shop built from corrugated metal and cedar, its name hand-painted across the side. Alvarez Mechanics, we fix what matters. He stepped out, the gravel crunching underfoot, and approached the open garage bay. Inside, a man in his 60s was hunched over the hood of an old pickup truck, grease on his hands, a faded cap shielding his face. Classic rock floated from a nearby radio, and the scent of oil mixed with sawdust. The moment felt sacred, like interrupting a prayer. Elon waited a moment, then cleared his throat gently. Mr. Alvarez. The man straightened slowly, turning to reveal sharp eyes beneath his cap, eyes that had seen more than they ever said. He squinted at Elon, not in recognition of fame, but in the way a craftsman assesses the integrity of something newly placed in his hands. Who's asking? I'm not here for a car, Elon said softly. I'm here because of Mason Riley. The name landed like a thunderclap in a church. Alvarez's face didn't move for a long moment. Then he turned away, wiped his hands on a rag, and motioned toward a wooden bench just outside the garage. Sick, he said. If we're going to talk about Mason, we do it right. They sat in silence at first, birds chirping overhead, the old truck engine ticking as it cooled. Then Alvarez spoke. You knew him? No, Elon replied. But someone gave me a photo. A torn one. Mason and you, I think. Alvarez looked at him, his jaw tightening. Let me see it. Elon handed it over. The old man held it like a relic, not just of a person, but of a moment too sacred for language. His fingers trembled slightly. He nodded once. Yeah, he whispered. That was our last photo together. I didn't even know it still existed. There was a long pause, filled with the weight of unspoken grief. He came here once, Alvarez continued. After school, wanted to see what a real shop looked like. Told me he loved rockets, but also wanted to build things with his hands. Said his dream was to work at NASA or SpaceX if they were still around when he got older. He glanced at Elon, eyes narrowing just a bit. Funny, huh? Elon nodded. Not funny. Important. I taught him everything I could. Gave him little kits, old manuals. He soaked it up like sunlight. Alvarez stared at the hills. And then the fire happened. I was supposed to pick him up that night. His mom had a shift and couldn't get him. But I was running late. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of blame, of love, of time that couldn't be rewound. I left after that, Alvarez finally said. Didn't want to teach anymore. Didn't want to talk. Just came out here and started fixing things I could fix. Elon wanted to say something, to reach into that cavern of guilt and offer light. But instead, he asked a question. Do you know who gave me this photo? Alvarez looked at him. No, but I've got a guess. He stood slowly, walked into the back of the shop, and returned with a weathered envelope. It was sealed with red wax, no address, no stamp. This came in the mail a week ago, he said. No return address. Inside was a note that just said, he still believes. Pass it on. I didn't know what to do with it. I figured it was someone playing a trick or trying to stir things up. But then you show up with that. He nodded toward the photo. So maybe it wasn't meant for me to keep. Elon took the envelope with both hands. It was heavier than he expected. Inside was a second piece of the photograph, carefully folded and wrapped in a piece of cloth. He opened it slowly, heart pounding. The image was clearer now. Mason stood at the center, beaming, and beside him, on the opposite side from Alvarez, stood a woman with a familiar warmth in her smile. She held a small notebook in one hand, her other resting gently on Mason's shoulder. Alvarez leaned in. That's his mom, Jenna. Elon stared at the photograph. The three of them looked like a constellation frozen mid-burst. A mentor, a mother, a child. Dreamers, all of them. She passed a year after Mason, Alvarez added. Cancer, but she wrote a lot. Journals, letters. Never threw anything away. Elon looked up. Do you know where she lived? Alvarez hesitated, then nodded slowly. There's a storage unit. Downtown. I have the key. They sat there for another moment, two men orbiting the same loss from different sides of the universe. Then Alvarez reached into his pocket and placed a brass key into Elon's palm. Go find what's next, he said. The key was old brass, slightly rusted around the teeth, like it had been waiting patiently, guarding its secrets. Elon held it in his palm as he drove back toward downtown Los Angeles, his thoughts tangled in images that refused to settle. Mason's bright eyes, Alvarez's haunted silence, and the quiet strength of a woman in the second piece of the photograph, holding her son's dream like it was something sacred. Jenna Riley, a name that had never crossed his orbit, and yet now felt like a beacon. It was late afternoon when he arrived at the storage facility, one of those anonymous rows of orange roll-up doors that look the same in every city. The manager on duty barely glanced at him, handing over a clipboard and waving toward the back of the lot. Elon walked slowly, counting numbers until he reached Unit 47. The key turned with a satisfying click, and the door lifted with a groan. Inside, the scent of dust and cardboard filled the space like a memory. The light was dim, shafts of sun slipping through the small ventilation slats above, dancing across the tops of stacked boxes and a single folding chair. No grandeur, no dramatics, just the quiet clutter of a life once lived. He stepped inside and gently shut the door behind him. Most of the boxes were labeled in Jenna's handwriting, dates, seasons, subjects. Mason fall projects, letters, medical notes, recipes, mom's favorites. Each label was like a whisper, inviting him to listen closer. He sat on the floor and began to open them one by one. In one box, he found a series of notebooks, spirals with frayed edges and creased covers, filled with Jenna's handwriting. Some were journal entries, others reflections, some letters she'd written but never sent. One caught his eye immediately. The title scrawled across the first page read, "For Mason, in case I'm not there." His breath caught. He turned the page and began to read. "My sweet boy, if you're reading this, it means I'm not sitting beside you, not brushing the hair from your forehead or packing your lunch or whispering that it's okay to be scared sometimes. But I want you to know this. You are already the most extraordinary person I have ever known. Not because of your test scores or your love of space, but because of your kindness. Your ability to see the best in broken things. Your stubborn belief that people can be better, even when the world gives you reasons to stop believing." Elon's hands trembled as he flipped through page after page of love, of fears scribbled out and rewritten, of dreams she held not for herself, but entirely for her son. She spoke about Mason's laughter, his resilience, his quiet loneliness, his conversations with the stars out on the apartment balcony. And then he reached the final entry. If you ever feel lost, Mason, find the dreamers. They'll remind you who you are. And if you can, be the one who reminds others. Pass it on. That's how we make sure none of this disappears. He closed the notebook slowly, pressing it to his chest. The room seemed to hum softly, as if the words themselves had changed the air. He went through the rest of the boxes in silence. In one, he found an old camcorder, still functional. In another, a tiny box of childhood treasures, a plastic moon rover, a hand-drawn map of Mars, a photograph of Mason in a cardboard helmet made from a cereal box. Elon smiled at that one, his throat tightening. And then, at the very bottom of the final box, he found a sealed envelope with his own name written across it. Elon Musk. He stared at it, blinking, unsure if he was imagining things. The handwriting was unmistakably Jenna's. With trembling fingers, he opened it. "Dear Mr. Musk," it began. "You don't know me, and by the time you read this, I may not be here anymore. But I need you to know something. My son believed in you. Not because of your titles or your money or your inventions, but because when he looked at you, he saw someone who still dared to imagine. Someone who never gave up on the sky. I told Mason once that dreams don't live forever unless they're carried. That belief has weight. And when I saw him tape your picture to his wall, next to his sketches, I realized he wasn't just watching you. He was following you. Please don't let that light go out. Even if you don't remember who you were when you began. Even if it hurts. Be the one who still believes. With love, Jenna Riley." Elon didn't cry, but something in him gave way, something that had been holding on for years without knowing why. Not a breakdown, not a collapse, just release. A letting go of the noise, the pressure, the need to always be moving forward at the cost of everything behind. He sat in the stillness of that unit for a long time, maybe an hour, maybe two, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. He felt connected to a boy he'd never met, to a woman he would never hug, to the invisible thread that weaves strangers into something like family. Outside, the sun had begun to set. Elon stepped into the amber light holding the torn photograph, now whole again. He didn't know what he was going to do next, but he knew it wouldn't be about rockets. It would be about people. Elon drove in silence, his fingers loosely gripping the steering wheel as the streets of downtown LA blurred around him. But his mind wasn't in the car. It was still in that quiet storage unit, still holding the letter, still sitting in the presence of someone else's truth. Jenna's words echoed inside him like a song remembered after years of forgetting the melody. Find the dreamers. Pass it on. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't demanded change. She had simply invited him to remember. And that somehow hit harder than any speech ever could. It was dusk again by the time he found himself back at the pier, the same one he'd wandered to the day the photograph first appeared in his hand. The sea looked different now, not because it had changed, but because he had. The tide moved with its same slow rhythm, but felt less like background noise and more like a heartbeat. He walked to the end of the pier, the folded photo, now carefully taped together and tucked safely inside the breast pocket of his jacket. The sun was slipping beneath the horizon, bleeding gold into the ocean. And there, bathed in that last light, Elon felt something stir. Not guilt, not grief, but a sense of quiet responsibility. He pulled out his phone, opened the camera, and took a photo of the repaired image. Then, hesitating just for a second, he posted it to his usually clinical social media feed with a caption that read, "Some things matter more than engines and algorithms. Some stories find you. This one found me. I'll explain soon." Within minutes, the post exploded. Thousands of likes, retweets, shares, questions. But Elon didn't refresh the screen. He wasn't seeking attention. He was sending up a flare, a signal. There were others out there, other Masons, other Jennas, other dreamers. Maybe they'd see it. Maybe they'd know they weren't alone. The next morning, he called a meeting, not with engineers or developers, but with his outreach team. He walked into the room and placed the photograph on the table like a thesis. "I want to start a new initiative," he said plainly. "Not for profit, not for PR, something real, something quiet." They looked at him confused. What kind of initiative? He paused. A mentorship network. One that finds kids like Mason. Ones with dreams too fragile to survive alone. "We'll fund it. No strings attached. Just time. Listening. Showing up." There was a silence in the room, not from resistance, but reverence. Then one of his assistants, a woman in her late 20s with thick glasses and a notebook perpetually in hand, spoke softly. "What's it called?" Elon glanced at the photo again. "Still believes." That same day, the team began planning. No press releases, no red carpets, just outreach, quiet calls to teachers, counselors, small-town libraries, forgotten schools tucked away in corners no one ever tweeted about. They asked a single question: "Do you know a child who needs someone to believe in them?" And the answers came, faster than expected, more heartfelt than imagined. Letters poured in, videos, handwritten essays. Teachers submitted journals. Parents submitted hopes. Some submissions came from the children themselves, folded and crumpled, but filled with impossible wonder. There were stories of hardship, yes, but also stories of courage, of spark, of kids who sketched stars onto torn paper because that's all they had. Each submission was reviewed by hand. No algorithms, no filters, just people reading about people. And Elon, he read them too. Every night, a handful at a time. With each one, he felt the same thing, that he hadn't stumbled onto a mission, he'd returned to one. One that had been quietly waiting for him behind all the boardrooms and blueprints. 1 week after launching Still Believes, Elon returned to Alvarez's shop with a binder full of names. He placed it on the same bench where they had sat before. "I want you to help lead this," he said. Alvarez opened the binder, scanned the first few pages, and exhaled like someone finally waking up. "You're serious?" Elon nodded. "I need people who know how to show up, people who've been there." The old man ran a hand through his hair, then slowly smiled. "Then I'm in." They shook hands, not the kind meant for cameras, but the kind that seals a quiet promise. A week later, Elon Musk found himself standing in the middle of a small community center in East Oakland, surrounded not by investors or engineers, but by middle school students clutching sketchbooks, homemade circuits, crayon-streaked blueprints of dreams too big for their classrooms. The air buzzed with something electricity couldn't explain, something older, rawer, more human. Curiosity, hope, that glowing thing that flickers inside a kid when someone takes them seriously. The center had received a call from a newly launched Still Believes network just 4 days prior. A mentor would be visiting. No one was told who it would be. So when Elon walked through the doors that morning, awkward but fully present, the kids gasped, and then the room went oddly silent. Not from starstruck awe, but from recognition, because they knew him. They knew the headlines, the rockets, the memes, but none of that mattered when they saw the way he walked in holding a notebook instead of a microphone. Not to lecture, to listen. A girl with thick glasses and big questions raised her hand shyly. "Are you really Elon Musk?" "I think so," he answered, then smiled. "But today I'm just here as someone who wants to hear what you believe in." That broke the ice. In the hours that followed, Elon sat on the floor next to 10-year-olds explaining wormholes with Lego sets. He watched a boy named Isaiah demonstrate how his toaster could be modified to monitor air quality with a sensor he'd salvaged from a broken printer. A girl named Emily showed him sketches of a flying wheelchair she wanted to design for her cousin who couldn't run at recess like the other kids. Her designs were crude, drawn in colored pencil and imagination, but they had the seed of something real, something daring. Elon asked questions. He nodded often. He took notes. And when the session wrapped and the pizza arrived, he lingered longer than expected, helping a group of students rearrange tables to build a test track for a solar-powered model car. But one kid, quiet, a bit apart from the others, hadn't said much. He sat cross-legged in the corner, thumbing through a small, torn notebook. Elon noticed. He walked over and crouched beside him. "Hey," he said softly. "What's that?" The boy glanced up, hesitant. "Just stuff I write." "May I?" Elon asked, gesturing to the book. The boy nodded and handed it over. The pages were filled with short paragraphs, tiny essays, thoughts about space, time, pain, loss, resilience. One entry simply read, "I don't think people see how much others are trying to keep from disappearing." Elon blinked. "That's powerful." The boy shrugged. "I guess. Do you write every day?" "Yeah. I used to talk to my older brother, but he passed. Now I write like I'm still telling him stuff. Like he's listening." Elon was quiet for a moment, then handed the notebook back. "I think he is." The boy looked at him with a mix of suspicion and gratitude, the kind of look only a kid who's been hurt young can give. "Do you write?" "Not enough," Elon admitted, "but I've been thinking about starting again." The boy smiled a little, then said something so small, so gentle, it nearly slipped past the moment. "Then don't wait too long." Elon didn't. That night, back at his hotel, he sat by the window overlooking the city lights and opened a fresh notebook. He didn't start with tech specs. Not a single mention of propulsion systems or neural architecture. Instead, he wrote, "Today I remembered why I started. It wasn't for Mars. It was for the feeling of possibility. For the way a kid's eyes light up when someone says, 'I believe you can.'" He kept writing. For hours. That became a ritual. Wherever he traveled, from South LA to the Navajo Nation, from Bronx classrooms to small towns in Ohio, he carried the photo with him. Not as a symbol, but as a compass. And in every city, he found at least one child whose story reminded him of Mason, of Jenna, of that stranger in the hotel lobby who had handed him the truth wordlessly and walked away. He never found the man again. Not in person, not online. But sometimes, Elon would swear he felt him nearby. On a train platform, in the corner of a crowd, on the steps of school before dawn. Like a ghost who wasn't haunting, but guiding, still believing. And so Elon kept building. Not just machines, but moments. Not just futures, but foundations. Because it turned out, the most revolutionary thing he could do wasn't invent something new. It was to remember something old. That we don't move forward unless we carry each other with us. It had been nearly a month since Elon received the torn photograph from a stranger in a lobby. And still, each morning, it was the first thing he checked for. Not his phone, not the stock market. The photo, carefully kept in a leather folio now. Its repaired seams still slightly visible down the middle, but its impact growing larger by the day. It no longer felt like a memory. It felt like a mission. The Still Believes initiative had grown faster than any of them expected. Not because of funding, money wasn't the fuel, but because people were hungry to belong to something that mattered beyond status or speed. Former teachers applied as mentors. Retired mechanics like Alvarez signed up to teach kids how to build. Scientists reached out offering remote lessons. Artists offered to design murals inspired by kids' drawings. Even kids who had once given up began writing back. And something else had started happening. Letters. Hundreds of them. Handwritten ones, delivered not to the offices of SpaceX or Tesla, but to the P.O. box Elon quietly set up for Still Believes. These weren't fan letters. They weren't about his public persona. They were raw confessions, stories of pain, of resilience, of wonder. A 12-year-old from Detroit who fixed old radios to learn how electricity danced. A girl in rural Mississippi who hadn't spoken in class for 2 years until she started sketching her vision for a self-watering greenhouse. A boy who lost both parents but still wanted to become an astronaut because they'd be watching from the stars. Each letter was a thread, and Elon read every single one. Some he answered personally. Others he passed to mentors in the network. A few he kept folded in his wallet like quiet armor. But one morning, among the usual stack, he found a small envelope with no return address. Just his name, in careful, rounded cursive. Inside was a single photograph. It was old, sepia-tone, faded, but unmistakably familiar. A younger Elon, maybe 25, standing on the launch pad of his first major failure. The one that nearly ended it all. He remembered the day, the heartbreak, the wait. He remembered the moment someone captured it, though he never knew the photo still existed. On the back, just 5 words were written. You still believe. Keep going. He sat at the edge of his desk, the photograph resting in his lap, and let the stillness swallow the room. That phrase, still believe, it had followed him through grief, through guilt, through transformation. But now it didn't sound like a reminder. It sounded like a baton. He stood and walked toward the large whiteboard in his office, the one once filled with launch trajectories and propulsion math. He erased it all in one slow motion, then stood staring at the clean slate. Then, in black marker, he wrote, "Build people, not just things." The words hung there like truth, like blueprint. That day, he made another call, this time to a small film crew he'd worked with on a documentary years ago. He wanted to record something, not a press conference, not a product demo, but a story. A real one. About Mason. About Jenna. About the stranger. About what happens when someone dares to pass something on. When the video went live a week later, it wasn't posted through corporate channels. It was released on the Still Believes website quietly, without announcement. Just a title, the photograph. It was 23 minutes long. No graphics, no edits. Just Elon sitting in a circle of folding chairs in a small community hall, telling the story. From the hotel lobby, to the photo, to the mural, to the letter in the storage unit. And then he stopped speaking and held up the repaired image for the camera to see. "This is what I was handed," he said, "and I didn't understand it at first. But now I know, it was never just a photo. It was a reminder that we all carry something worth believing in. And sometimes we forget. Sometimes someone else has to hand it back to us." The video spread like a ripple. Not viral, vital. People didn't just watch it, they responded to it. Comment sections filled with stories, not emojis. Not noise. Stories. People sharing who handed them their metaphorical photograph. Who believed in them when they didn't. Who they had forgotten to thank. And then something else began. People started passing photographs of their own. Old ones. Torn ones. Photos of mentors, of mothers, of moments. Mailed to strangers. Left in libraries. Taped to park benches with short notes. Still believes in you. Keep going. You matter more than you know. The movement had no logo, but it had a pulse. And for Elon Musk, the man the world often thought they knew, it became the most meaningful creation of his life. Not a rocket, not a car, not an app, but a legacy passed not through code or combustion, but through compassion. It was somewhere in Utah, a town small enough that GPS gave up trying to name it, when Elon felt the story shift again. He had flown in unannounced, driving out with only a local mentor and a beat-up rental car, following a lead submitted through the Still Believes site. The name on the letter had been handwritten in soft blue ink, Charlie Ruiz. Age 12. Likes dogs, dislikes math, wants to be an inventor. They arrived just after sunset. The landscape was wide and soft, with faded storefronts and a playground lit only by a flickering street lamp. The house they pulled up to was modest, paint peeling, a tricycle overturned in the dirt. But the porch light was on, and a boy with messy hair and oversized glasses stepped outside like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. "You're really him," Charlie said, blinking behind thick lenses. "I'm really me," Elon replied, "and I came to see what you're building." Charlie beamed. He led them around back, past an old washing machine being used as a planter, to a small shed made of plywood and dreams. Inside was a chaos of brilliance: wires, duct tape, a fan blade turned into a wind turbine. On the wall, pages had been thumbtacked and rearranged into a constellation of ideas. Some were scribbles, some were stunningly detailed. At the center of it all, a blueprint labeled "Water Purifier for Anywhere." Charlie explained that he wanted to help kids like his cousin, who lived on a reservation and sometimes didn't have clean water. His plan used solar panels, clay, charcoal, and parts from broken appliances. Elon didn't interrupt. He just watched, asked questions, and nodded slowly as Charlie spoke with both pride and a little shyness, like he wasn't used to anyone staying in the shed long enough to really listen. At the end of the visit, Charlie reached into his pocket and handed Elon a photo. It was small and slightly curved, clearly carried around for a while. "This is my mom," Charlie said. "She died last year. But she used to tell me if you believe in something long enough, it gets closer." Elon took the photo gently, looking into the eyes of a woman who clearly passed down both strength and softness. "She was right," he said. "You brought something into the world that wasn't here before. That matters." Charlie nodded, trying hard not to cry. "You're the first person to tell me that." And there it was again. That ache, that fire, that wordless knowing that belief isn't just powerful, it's essential. Later that night, Elon lay awake in a modest motel room, the desert wind brushing against the window like a lullaby made of dust. He thought about how many Charlies were out there, kids with quiet fire, waiting for someone to sit beside them and say, "I see you. Keep going." He sat up, reached for his notebook, and wrote a single sentence. "We cannot afford to let potential stay hidden just because it wasn't born loud." That thought stayed with him as he moved through more towns, more centers, more lives. One day in a high school library in Oregon, he met a girl who coded music programs to help her nonverbal brother communicate emotions through sound. She called it Echo Speak. Another day, in a weathered gymnasium in Baton Rouge, he met a pair of twins who taught themselves how to build prosthetics from scrap metal using open-source schematics. Each of them handed him something intangible, but some gave him photos too. Eventually, Elon had a box. Not a metaphorical one, a real one, filled with photographs. Torn ones, repaired ones, ones that had been taped to mirrors or carried in wallets. Photos of people who believed before the world gave them permission. And he realized this wasn't just about honoring a stranger's gift from that hotel lobby anymore. This was a relay. That photo had started something, and now it needed to be passed again. So he did something quietly revolutionary. He began mailing photos, one at a time. He would select a story from the Still Believes program and send a photograph from someone else's journey, with a note. Sometimes it was a line from Jenna's letter, sometimes from one of the kids. Sometimes it was just the phrase, "You're not alone. Pass it on." Each envelope included instructions. Write your own story on the back. Then give it to someone else who might need to believe again. No one was told what to do beyond that. And that was the point. The photographs began appearing in most unexpected places. One was taped inside a fire station locker in Milwaukee. Another turned up tucked inside a copy of A Wrinkle in Time at a library in Toronto. Someone found one in the seat back pocket of an airplane headed to Istanbul. Each one now carried layers of stories on the back, like footprints in the sand leading forward and back all at once. It was never a campaign. It was a current. And Elon, he just kept watching it flow. It was a cold morning in November when Elon received a package unlike any other. No return address, no markings, just a plain cardboard envelope sitting quietly at the edge of his desk. Something about the weight of it made him pause. It wasn't heavy, not physically, but it carried the same kind of gravity that the original torn photograph had. Like whatever was inside had traveled not just through miles, but through meaning. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph, but this one hadn't been passed down or taped back together. It was brand new. A little girl, maybe 6, standing on a wooden porch in the rain, holding a cardboard sign above her lemonade stand that read, "Still Believes." Elon felt something crack open in him again. There was no note, no signature, just the image, grainy, sincere, and glowing with the unmistakable energy of a child trying to make sense of a very big world. It took him a moment to realize he was smiling. Not the practiced smile he gave on stage, not the polite smile of public appearances, but a real one, soft, unguarded, grateful. He walked to the window and stared out at the city, feeling for the first time in a long time like the buildings below weren't just made of steel and glass, but of people, of stories, of belief held together by invisible thread. That day, Elon changed something quietly at the heart of the Still Believes initiative. Until then, it had been about outreach, about finding the forgotten, the overlooked. Now it would also be about celebration. A space was created on the website called the Wall of Belief, a digital mosaic where anyone, anywhere in the world, could upload a photo that represented a person who believed in them. It could be a grandmother, a neighbor, a coach, a stranger, a friend they hadn't seen in years. Each submission asked just one thing: tell us what they saw in you. Within hours, the wall began to fill. And not with celebrities or curated perfection, but with humanity in its rawest, most breathtaking form. Old lunch ladies from elementary schools, janitors who fixed broken bikes, a photo of a soldier's father with grease on his hands, holding his first drawing of a helicopter, a selfie of two sisters in a hospital bed, a black and white image of a man standing next to a boy in front of a model rocket, taped together and uploaded by a user named at M. Riley Memory. The wall became something sacred. Teachers began using it in classrooms. Counselors used it as prompts for healing. Families shared the stories during dinners, funerals, reunions. And Elon, he would log on late at night, scroll for hours, and let the tide of belief carry him deeper into the world than algorithms ever could. But not everyone understood what was happening. At a tech conference in Berlin, a moderator asked him bluntly during a fireside chat, why pivot from innovation to emotion? Why this shift into something so abstract? Elon looked at the man for a moment, then at the crowd. He didn't speak immediately. When he finally did, his voice was calm but certain. Because we've made the mistake of thinking belief is abstract. It's not. It's infrastructure. It's what holds bridges up before they're built. It's what keeps a kid from walking away from themselves. It's what keeps a mentor coming back, even after they've been forgotten. The room went still. No invention matters if no one believes they can use it. No one applauded. Not right away. It wasn't soundbite. It was too real. But by the end of the conference, even the most cynical attendees were asking about Still Believes. And not to invest, but to volunteer. One of them was a young programmer named Naima. She approached Elon backstage, hands slightly trembling. She told him her parents had fled conflict, that she'd taught herself to code in secret, and that until 2 years ago, she thought the only thing she'd ever create was silence. But then someone, a high school robotics teacher, handed her a photograph of a girl standing on a roof with a paper telescope and said, "This reminds me of you." It changed everything. Now Naima was writing open source curriculum for Still Believes. And Elon, he looked at her and saw Mason. He saw Jenna. He saw the man in the hotel. And he saw himself years ago, before the noise, before the speed, before the world made him forget the kid who used to draw rockets in the margins of math homework. Before leaving, Naima reached into her backpack and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. "I've been passing this on," she said, "but I think it's time it came full circle." She handed him a photograph. It was the same one. Mason, the model rocket, Jenna, Alvarez. The original, not the copy he'd been carrying. The original, torn edges intact, ink faded, the memory of a life preserved through all the hands it had passed. Elon didn't ask how she got it. Some things aren't explained. They're received and honored. The next phase of Still Believes began quietly, as most meaningful things do, not with announcements, but with listening. Elon and his team started working with a new idea, one that came not from a boardroom, but from a child's letter left inside a folded origami rocket. What if belief had a place to live, not just a place to be mailed? Those words stayed with Elon. They kept showing up in his thoughts, in his late-night journal scribbles, even in dreams that woke him without alarm. And so for weeks he sketched. Not blueprints of machines or software ecosystems, but of spaces. Places where belief could live and grow. Where strangers could sit down and feel seen. Where children could enter and leave with more than just inspiration. They'd leave with community. What emerged was a new branch of the movement, physical locations called houses of belief. Not museums, not schools, not maker spaces, but hybrids of all three. safe havens where kids could create, share, ask questions, and fail without fear. Places where mentorship wasn't occasional, it was the foundation. Places where walls were covered not in trophies, but in handwritten notes, sketches, and photographs, each one representing someone's belief passed forward. The first house of belief opened in Oakland, in a converted library that had once been set to close due to budget cuts. Instead, it was reborn. Volunteers painted the walls in bright colors, filled shelves with tools and markers and wires and musical instruments. A retired NASA engineer taught aerodynamics beside a 15-year-old who had learned Arduino programming from YouTube. An artist in her 60s came every Wednesday to teach visual storytelling through collage. And on the wall near the entrance, framed under museum glass, hung the original torn photograph. Mason, Jenna, Alvarez. That moment before everything shattered, now the cornerstone of something that refused to break. When the grand opening happened, Elon didn't give a speech. He sat on the floor beside a group of children and helped one of them untangle wires for a model satellite. When someone asked for a quote to paint above the door, he suggested they let the kids vote. They chose a line from Jenna's letter. "Find the dreamers. They'll remind you who you are." More houses of belief followed, each one unique, each one built in a place where forgotten dreams had once piled up like dust. Detroit, Tulsa, Helena. A pop-up version in Nairobi, hosted in a shipping container, outfitted with solar panels and a chalkboard painted across the walls. The photographs kept arriving, more than Elon ever expected. Some were from strangers, some from children, some from people whose lives had been changed by someone else's quiet courage. People began including short audio recordings too, memories, confessions, affirmations. A mother whispering, "I never told you I believed in you, but I always did." A man saying to the janitor who stayed late and helped me fix my science fair project, "I remember." A boy's voice, "I thought no one ever saw me until she handed me a photograph and said, 'This is what potential looks like.'" These stories began being archived, not in cloud storage, not behind paywalls, but in an online library called the Echo Archive, free, open, infinite. Elon funded anonymously at first, but eventually his name became attached not by necessity, but because someone had to own the act of remembering. And that, he realized, was what belief really was, not just hope for what might be, but honoring what already was and refusing to let it vanish. And then one morning, something happened that stopped him cold. It was early and he was in Austin, visiting a build site for the next house. A young volunteer approached him, holding a smartphone. "Mr. Musk," she said carefully, "someone just uploaded something to the Echo Archive. You should see this." He took the phone and hit play. The screen filled with the face of an older man, gray hair, deep eyes, standing in front of the same hotel lobby where all of this began. "I don't know if you remember me," the man said, "but I handed you a photo. Years ago now. Maybe it was just the right time. Maybe you were the right person." The camera panned slightly, showing the exact spot near the window where they had stood. The man smiled. "I've watched from a distance. Not in the creepy way, just in the way someone does when they've carried a candle and is finally seeing someone light the next one." He paused. "I didn't have a plan. I didn't know if it would mean anything, but I knew that photo didn't belong with me anymore. It belonged to the next carrier." The image shook slightly, as though he were holding back tears. "You've done more than I ever dreamed. And now I'm handing it back, not to you but to the world. Because maybe that's what belief is. Not a spark we keep, but a flame we pass." Then the screen went black. No name, no title, just silence. Elon stared at the phone for a long time. The construction noise faded behind him. The volunteers moved like ghosts in the background. And for a moment, it was just him and that first ripple coming full circle. He whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you." Then he put the phone down, walked back to the team, and helped unload boxes of supplies. There was still more to build. But now, every nail, every board, every lesson, it wasn't just construction. It was continuation. The sun had sunk behind the skyline, leaving streaks of burnt orange and quiet lavender across the Los Angeles sky, as Elon stood in the now empty lot where the train station had once buzzed with life. His fingers still trembled slightly around the worn edge of the torn photograph. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It felt reverent, like the world itself was pausing to remember. He stared at the picture again. The young boy's grin. The man behind him, definitely his father. The same dimple on the left cheek. But now, as Elon looked closer, something strange stirred within him. A memory not quite visual, more like a feeling, like the scent of something familiar or a tune hummed long ago. It wasn't recognition, not yet. It was resonance. He sat on a nearby bench, still damp from the earlier drizzle, and let the air cool his skin. The city murmured around him, horns, distant laughter, the echo of footsteps, and he remembered the taxi driver's last words. Look past what you think you know. Some secrets are meant to guide, not haunt. Elon unfolded the map that had come with the photograph. It was more than a map now, it was a puzzle. Several points were marked with faint blue XS, each one paired with a date, some dating back nearly 50 years. He traced them with his index finger one by one until he noticed that each of them formed a rough circle, a radius that converged on a single, unmarked point. The center of it all, his breath caught in his throat. That point was a rural town not far from Bakersfield, a forgotten place, long bypassed by freeways and forgotten by time. He knew the name only because he had once invested in a solar project there that never took off. The government paperwork, the permits, buried somewhere deep in his memory, had passed over his desk years ago. He pulled out his phone and called Jana. "I need the jet prepped. We're going to Carter's Hollow." A pause. Then her voice, calm and steady, alone. "Yes, just me." She didn't question it. She rarely did anymore. The flight was short, the landing rough. Carter's Hollow didn't have an airstrip, just a stretch of dirt near the old silo that had been abandoned since the 70s. The town itself felt like a pocket of a forgotten world. Wooden houses leaning with age, paint peeling like old skin. A general store that hadn't changed its window display since the Reagan administration. And yet it felt alive in a strange way, like a place that remembered everything. Elon walked down the narrow main street, the photograph in his jacket pocket, his footsteps crunching on gravel. A few townspeople watched him from their porches, their expressions unreadable. One older man, seated on a rocking chair, nodded slowly as if he'd been expecting this moment for years. He stopped in front of a diner, the same one marked faintly on the map. It was called Marla's. The neon sign buzzed weakly, flickering between pink and white. He stepped inside. The scent of fried onions and cinnamon clung to the air. A bell above the door jingled gently. There was only one customer, a woman in her 60s sitting at the counter, sipping coffee. The waitress behind the counter looked up, startled, then smiled politely. "Evening." "You're a long way from anywhere," she said, pouring him a cup without asking. Elon nodded. "I'm looking for someone." "Aren't we all?" she replied with a knowing tilt of her head. He took a seat at the counter and slid the photograph across the smooth surface. "Do you know them?" The waitress picked it up and squinted. The older woman at the end of the counter leaned in, too. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. Then the older woman murmured, "That's Johnny and Theo." Elon's heart skipped. They used to come here all the time. Johnny worked the trains back when they still stopped in Carter's Hollow. Theo was his boy. Smart kid, always talking about rockets and time machines. Said he wanted to build a ship to find his real mom on another planet. She chuckled softly, lost in memory. Elon leaned in, voice quiet. "What happened to them?" The woman's expression grew somber. "Johnny died in a fire. Some say it was an accident. Others say, well, Johnny had secrets. He used to disappear for months. Some thought he worked for the government. Others thought he was running from something." "And Theo?" Elon asked, barely breathing. "No one knows. After Johnny passed, Theo vanished, like he was never here. Some folks say he was taken. Others say he left to find whatever Johnny had been hiding." She looked up, right into Elon's eyes. "You look like him." Elon froze. "Johnny." "No, Theo." The silence between them was like a crack of thunder. Elon reached into his coat and pulled out a folded, faded document, the kind found in orphanage archives. His own file. Date of admission, August 1979. No parental details. Just one scribbled note, found near Carter's Hollow train station. His chest tightened. The torn photograph. The dates. The taxi driver's voice in his head. All of it. A storm of realization broke within him. Not just about Johnny and Theo. Not just about the stranger who gave him the photo, but about himself, who he truly was, and who he had been all along. The silence inside Marla's was oddly comforting. Not hollow, not awkward, just full of history. Elon let the edges of the torn photograph rest against the counter as he stared at the grain in the old wood beneath it. Each groove, each scratch seemed to echo a story, much like the one unraveling before him. He wasn't just tracing strangers anymore. He was stepping into the bones of something ancestral, something deeply personal. The older woman, who had introduced herself only as Ruth, shifted her coffee mug slightly and said almost to herself, he used to draw rockets on napkins while waiting for his dad to get off work. He was always dreaming of other worlds, but I don't think he realized the one he was standing in was already broken. Elon's voice was hoarse. "Did you know him well?" She nodded, eyes distant. "Theo? Like he was my own blood. He'd run around here like he owned the place. But he was a quiet kind of bright. Not loud, just observant. Like he carried more than a kid should ever have to. Like he was always waiting for someone to come back." Elon swallowed, struggling to contain the flood of questions that wanted to burst free. Did he ever mention why they left? Not to me, but Johnny used to get real nervous when men in suits came through town. That only happened once or twice, but after that, he was different. Always looking over his shoulder. One day, he said he was taking Theo to see the stars. Said he'd found something that could change the way people think about time. Ruth gave him a pointed look. That's not something a train conductor usually says. Elon felt a subtle tremor under his ribs, like the moment before a plane lifts off the runway. "Time," he repeated, "and no one saw Theo after that. No one we could prove, but every now and then, a boy would show up in a nearby town. Alone, smart, quiet, gone within days. It became kind of a ghost story. They'd say, that's Theo's spirit still chasing stars." Elon exhaled shakily. What if he didn't disappear? What if he became someone else? She didn't smile. She just studied him. That's a question only you can answer. He felt a sudden urge to move, to do something. The air inside the diner had thickened, and it pressed against his chest like a storm front. He stood up, thanked Ruth with a gentle touch on her shoulder, and stepped back into the dusk. The breeze had picked up, rustling dry leaves across the pavement. He unfolded the map again. The excess, there was one left. It was marked with today's date, but there was no location written beside it. Just a hand-drawn spiral, small at the center, widening outward, almost like a fingerprint, or a vortex. Beneath it, scrawled in shaky letters, where it all ends, or begins. Following his intuition, Elon rented an old truck from the only mechanic shop in town. The vehicle was a battered blue Ford, its side mirrors held in place with duct tape and defiance. The shop owner, a man named Grady with oil-stained fingers and a permanent squint, didn't ask questions. He simply handed over the keys and said, "Don't go up the ridge after dark. The air gets weird up there." Elon drove. The road was narrow and lined with overgrown brush. Moonlight cast long shadows across the gravel path as the truck groaned up the incline. Eventually, the road disappeared altogether, turning into a trail that wound around the base of a steep hill. He parked beneath an old tree whose bark was etched with initials and dates, long-forgotten declarations of love, perhaps. The atmosphere shifted as he stepped out, quieter, heavier, like walking into the center of a held breath. He hiked the rest of the way on foot, the photograph in one hand, the map in the other. The spiral on the paper felt less like a symbol now, and more like a compass. He followed it, not with logic, but with instinct. At the summit, the land flattened into a clearing, surrounded by silent pine trees. At the very center was a small stone structure, almost like a well or bunker. Its circular lid was covered in moss and dirt. Elon crouched, brushed it off carefully, and saw something carved into the stone. For those who forgot where they came from. His heart pounded. He pushed the lid aside, revealing a narrow spiral staircase descending into darkness. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone's flashlight and began the descent. The walls were made of smooth stone, cool to the touch, curving endlessly downward like he was being swallowed by the earth itself. The air grew cooler, denser. When he reached the bottom, he stepped into a room no larger than a shipping container. The walls were covered in diagrams, blueprints, star charts, fragments of equations. On one side, a series of photographs were pinned up, aged and curled. A man, Johnny. A boy, Theo. Over time, the boy changed, got taller, smarter, hungrier. And then there was a photograph of Elon himself, younger, maybe in his 20s, standing in front of SpaceX. He staggered backward. Below the photo, in trembling black ink, he made it. Suddenly, a projector mounted to the ceiling clicked to life, casting light across the wall. A voice, grainy but unmistakably Johnny's, filled the chamber. If you're watching this, it means the past caught up with the future, and the loop has closed. You are Theo. You were always Theo. Elon stood frozen. The voice continued. I couldn't protect you from everything, but I could hide you long enough to give you a shot. You had to grow up without knowing. It was the only way. If they found out who you were, what you carried inside, they'd never let you live long enough to discover it on your own. Johnny's voice cracked slightly. I love you, son. I hope one day you understand. And then silence. Not the cold kind, but a silence that hugged him, that wrapped around the deepest part of him like a father's hand on a child's shoulder. The silence that followed Johnny's recording wasn't empty. It rang with presence, as if his father's spirit still lingered in that stone room, watching, waiting. Elon stood motionless, breath shallow, while the projector's beam dimmed and faded. Darkness began to reclaim the walls, inch by inch, erasing the memories he had just uncovered. He pressed his hand against the image of his younger self, fingertips brushing against the edges of the photo like he could somehow reach backward through time. The boy in the picture looked ambitious, untouchable, a genius in the making. But now, Elon couldn't help but see the hidden longing behind that confidence. The questions buried so deep that even he hadn't realized they were there. Theo. The name vibrated in his bones now, not as an alias or a shadow, but as something foundational. He hadn't forgotten who he was. He had been made to forget. His mind reeled, flipping through memories that no longer sat still. Childhood dreams, vivid nightmares, an unexplainable sense of displacement that had always hovered just behind his success. He wasn't just Elon Musk, architect of rockets and revolutions. He was Theo, the boy who once scribbled stars onto napkins in a small-town diner. The boy whose father had died trying to protect a secret too vast for anyone else to carry. He sat down on the stone floor, letting the weight of it all settle. The ache in his chest was unfamiliar. Not grief exactly, though there was grief there. Not regret, though that too lingered. No, it was something more elemental. Something like coming home. He stayed there for what felt like hours, surrounded by sketches and fragments of a story that had been hidden even from himself. Diagrams of propulsion engines that mirrored early SpaceX designs. Spiral notations he'd once seen in old dreams. A napkin, yes, a literal napkin, with a child's drawing of a rocket ship shooting into a heart-shaped moon. It was signed in shaky blue ink, Theo, age 6. That was the piece that undid him. Tears filled his eyes. For the first time in years, they fell without shame. No cameras, no headlines, no legacy to maintain. just a man meeting the child he had been and realizing how much of him had survived. By the time he emerged from the chamber, the night had deepened and the sky above Carter's Hollow was blanketed with stars. Real stars. No satellites. No noise. Just the infinite, unbothered beauty of the cosmos. He drove back in silence, the truck's engine groaning like a tired companion. As he reached the edge of town, he saw Ruth standing outside Marla's, wrapped in a shawl, sipping something from a steaming mug. She didn't ask what he had found. She didn't need to. He parked and approached her slowly. "I remember," he said simply. She smiled with a kind of sadness that only time could teach. "Then you're ready." "For what?" "To decide what comes next." He looked back toward the hills, where the bunker lay hidden beneath stone and memory. "There's a part of me that wants to tell the world, show them who I was, who I am. And the other part," he exhaled, "wants to keep it just between me and the stars." She nodded, as if both choices were equally sacred. "Maybe it's not about what you tell," she said gently. "Maybe it's about how you live, now that you know." He looked at her grateful. "Do you think he ever really forgave himself?" "Johnny," Ruth whispered, eyes fixed on the horizon, "I think he never stopped loving you. And love, it leaves a trail, even when the rest fades." A silence stretched between them, comfortable now. Not everything needed to be spoken. Before heading back to the truck, Elon turned one last time to her. "If anyone else ever comes looking..." She cut him off with a smile. "I'll give them coffee. Let them rest. But the story? That's yours to share or not." He nodded, tucked the torn photographs safely into his coat pocket, and drove off into the dawning light. The return to Los Angeles felt different. Not because the city had changed, but because he had. Everything buzzed with noise, yet beneath it all, he carried a kind of stillness now. A quiet certainty that even if the world saw him one way, he no longer needed to prove or hide the truth. Back at the office, Jana handed him a folder with a curious expression. "You disappeared," she said without accusation. "Everything okay?" Elon took the folder, glanced at the contents, contracts, projections, logistical nonsense, and set it aside. "I remembered something important," he said. "Something I didn't even know I had lost." She studied him. "You seem lighter." "I am," he replied. Then, after a pause, "How long do you think we could keep a project secret?" Her eyebrows lifted. "Define secret." "I mean off the record. No investors. No headlines. Just something for us. For the world, maybe, but without the world watching." She smiled, catching the spark behind his words. "You've got that look again." "What look?" "The one you had the day you decided to launch a car into space." He grinned. But this time, it wasn't about spectacle. This time it was about rediscovery, reconnection, legacy not as ego, but as memory. He walked to the window, looked out over the sprawl of the city, and whispered to himself, "It all began with a photograph, and it ends with choice." A week passed, then two. No press conferences, no cryptic tweets. Elon Musk simply returned to work, to meetings, to the rhythm of the world as it was, but something had shifted beneath the surface. Those closest to him noticed first. His assistant Jana mentioned it quietly one morning as they stood in front of a whiteboard covered in AI schematics. "You're not rushing anymore," she said. He looked at her. "Was I before?" "Always," she replied, offering a half-smile. "Even when you weren't moving." He considered that. For years, his life had felt like a constant acceleration. More launches, more deals, more innovation. But now, for the first time, he wasn't chasing the future like it was a finish line. He was meeting it slowly, deliberately, as if he had finally remembered how to breathe in between the lines. He began arriving early to the office, not to work, but to sit in stillness before the noise began. He asked questions differently in meetings, less about efficiency, more about intention. He revisited shelved projects, not for profitability, but for meaning. One morning, he called the head of the foundation and redirected funds towards small town schools, specifically those with arts and science crossover programs. Why rural towns, they asked. Because sometimes the next genius is holding a crayon under a leaky roof, he said quietly, and no one ever comes looking for them. At night, he started going on long drives alone without a destination. He'd turn off the GPS, roll the windows down, and follow the road until it led to somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere quiet. He kept the torn photograph with him, always folded neatly in the breast pocket of his jacket. It had become more than a clue. It was an anchor, a reminder that identity wasn't something built in front of cameras. It was something slowly revealed, like a photograph emerging in a darkroom, grain by grain. One night, he stopped at a roadside diner, not as polished as Marla's, but just as full of warmth. The waitress was young, maybe early 20s, with the kind of weariness in her eyes that came from holding a family together when no one else would. She didn't recognize him at first. "Just coffee?" she asked, pen hovering. He smiled gently. "And a slice of whatever pie you're most proud of." That earned him a small chuckle. "Then, it's the lemon meringue. My grandma's recipe." They talked, just briefly, about nothing that mattered and everything that did. About dreams that stayed small and those that got away. She mentioned she used to draw rocket ships as a kid, but never thought someone like her could build anything that left the ground. He left her a tip folded inside a napkin, along with a handwritten note. "Don't stop drawing. The stars are closer than you think. E.M." Back in Los Angeles, an unmarked envelope arrived at his office. Inside was a single photograph of Ruth, younger, holding a baby. On the back, written in the same hand that had left notes all over that underground chamber, were 4 words: "She never stopped watching." It took Elon a long time to set the photo down. Not because it hurt, but because it felt like a closing of a circle he hadn't even realized was still open. He made a call that afternoon. "Yana, I want to go back. To Carter's Hollow." There was no hesitation. "You want the jet?" "No," he said, smiling faintly. "Just a car. And time." The return was quiet. Ruth was waiting on the porch when he arrived, as if she'd never moved. "You remembered," she said, her eyes warm. "I never forgot," he replied, handing her the photo. She looked at it, tears forming behind her weathered gaze. "He left that for me," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to send it until now." They sat together on the porch, just 2 souls tethered by time, silence, and things unsaid. "I always wondered," she said after a while, "if what Johnny did was right, taking you away like that." Elon turned to her. "He gave me a future, and in a way, he gave me back to myself." She nodded. Then maybe it wasn't a mistake, just a different kind of path. As the sun dipped below the trees, he reached into his pocket and unfolded the map one last time. The spiral. He traced it slowly, then drew a small X just outside the last ring. Ruth leaned in. "What's that?" "A beginning," he said. "One that doesn't forget the past." It was a quiet morning when Elon returned to the city. The skies above LA wore that hazy, golden veil only spring could bring, and everything seemed to slow down just a bit more than usual. Not in inefficiency, but in reverence. Like the world had agreed to match his new rhythm. He stepped into his office without an entourage. No one stood to greet him. No press waiting at the lobby. Just the soft whir of the elevators and the hum of morning energy. Jana handed him a warm coffee and asked if he wanted to start with the investor briefings. "No," he said without hesitation. "Today I want to talk to the engineers." She blinked, surprised. "About what?" "About building something," he said, and then paused. "That doesn't need my name to matter." He spent the next 3 hours in the workshop floor, moving between prototypes and circuit boards, listening more than speaking. He asked questions like, "Who did you make this for?" And "What's the feeling you want someone to have when they first use it?" It threw some of them off. But for the first time, they didn't feel like they were building for a brand. They were building for something human. One young woman showed him a design for a solar-powered desalination module meant for drought-impacted villages. "What's the name of this project?" he asked. She looked sheepish. It didn't have one. I wasn't sure it'd get approved. He held her drawing up to the light. "It will now. Call it Theo 1. She tilted her head. "Theo." He just smiled. "Yeah, it's a long story." Later that afternoon, Elon visited a small community garden project downtown. It was one of many scattered throughout neglected parts of the city, funded quietly through various arms of his foundation. But this one had something the others didn't: a mural. A massive one, stretched across a faded wall, depicting a rocket ship lifting off into a sky filled with stars made from children's fingerprints. He stood there for a while unnoticed. A boy around 8 years old ran up beside him, looking at the mural, then at him. "You like spaceships?" the boy asked, wiping dirt from his hands. Elon nodded. "Always have." "I drew the moon," the kid said proudly, pointing to a smudge of pale silver above the rocket. "It's perfect," Elon said. "My grandma says people like me don't get to go to space." Elon crouched beside him, eye level. "Your grandma might be wrong about that." The boy squinted, unconvinced. "How do you know?" He pulled the worn photograph from his pocket, showed it to the boy. "Because a long time ago, someone told me the same thing." The boy looked at it carefully. "Is that you?" "Maybe," Elon replied, standing again. "But it doesn't matter. What matters is what you'll do with your stars." That night, he returned home and sat alone on the balcony, overlooking the distant glow of the city. He thought of Ruth, of Johnny, of the spiral drawn in black ink and the bunker buried in the hills. He thought of Theo, the child version of himself, so long buried under steel, strategy, and silence. He picked up a pen and began to write. Not code, not a business proposal. A letter. To no one. To everyone. Dear Theo, you were never lost. You were just waiting for the noise to quiet long enough to hear yourself again. I know you wondered where your father went, why he disappeared, why he left no answers. But he gave you everything. A name. A silence worth listening to. A dream worth chasing. I don't know if I can fix everything we've built, but I can remember. And remembering changes everything. Wherever you are, whatever version of me you've become, keep going. The stars are watching, and they remember you. E. He folded the letter, placed it inside a small box, and set it on the shelf beside the photograph. No glass case, no plaque, just presence. A few feet away, his phone lit up with another news alert. A spike in Tesla stock, a rumored Mars Initiative leak, a political endorsement request. He let the phone go dark. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and let the city's pulse fill the quiet around him. The future would wait. Tonight, he belonged to the stars. Days later, Elon sat beneath a tree at Griffith Park, surrounded by the sound of wind brushing through leaves and the laughter of distant children tumbling down grassy hills. No cameras, no handlers, just a quiet place to sit with the weight and lightness of memory. He opened a small leather notebook, the kind he'd never used before, and began sketching. Not plans, not patents, just a scene, a train station platform, a boy holding his father's hand, a distant rocket scrawled in the sky above them. He didn't know if it was a memory or an invention. At this point, it didn't matter. A man sat down beside him unexpectedly. Mid-30s, shaggy hair, a faded hoodie with a SpaceX pin half clipped to the fabric. You Elon? He asked cautiously. Elon nodded. That depends on the day. The man grinned, shy. I saw you speak once. Years ago. Said something like, the future is what we build it to be, not what we're told it should be. Elon looked at him thoughtfully. Sounds like something I'd say on very little sleep. The man laughed. It stuck. Got me through a lot. I was lost. Still kind of am. Then you're already doing better than most, Elon said. The man hesitated, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded, slightly worn envelope. I found this at a thrift shop in Arizona. Inside a used book about star charts. No return address. Just your name. Elon's brows furrowed. He opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a photograph, but not torn. Oh, it was the original version. Johnny holding Theo, standing on the edge of a platform. The train behind them was marked with a destination Elon had never noticed before, to the heart. And scrawled on the bottom edge, in his father's handwriting, "One day, you'll remember why you looked up." Elon pressed his fingers to the image, smiling with his whole chest. "Thank you," he said to the man beside him. The man shrugged. "Maybe it was meant for you. Maybe you're meant to pass it on." Elon folded the photograph, placed it in his pocket. He turned to the man. "What's your name?" "Chris." "Well, Chris, want to see the inside of a rocket?" The guy blinked. "You're kidding." "I'm not, but only if you promise to ask real questions. Not the kind you think I want to hear." Chris stood up slowly. "Like, what kind of questions?" Elon smiled. "Ones that make you feel something when you say them out loud." And with that, they walked off together, not toward the future, but toward the present. Toward curiosity, toward what it means to connect beyond legacy and title. That evening, as the sun set once more over the city, Elon stood on another balcony, this one much lower, just above the street where people moved like constellations of their own stories. He held the now complete photograph in one hand, and in the other, a fresh page from his notebook. Not filled with sketches this time, but with a single sentence. Who we are isn't the story that made us, it's the story we choose to keep telling. He taped the sentence to his wall, right above the box with the original letter. And this time, he turned to the camera, his own, set up quietly in the corner, and pressed record. No lights, no script, just him. "Hi, I'm not here to launch anything. Not today. I just want to ask you something." He leaned forward, voice low. "Who are you when no one's watching?" A pause. "Who were you before the world told you who to be?" Another pause. And then, if any part of you still remembers, drop it in the comments. Not for me, for you. Because the world doesn't need more followers. It needs more people who've remembered how to feel. He stopped recording. No edits. No tags. He just uploaded it. And now we turn to you. What part of this story spoke to you? What moment made you pause, reflect, or remember something of your own? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to let us know what city you're watching from. Maybe, just maybe, your story begins here too. And if you found yourself moved, inspired, or even just a little more human, consider subscribing. This isn't just a story about Elon. It's a story about all of us. The end.